Hello everyone. Before we start, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. That's how YouTube keeps sending you stories like this. And now, let's get into it. I was driving home late at night, a long straight stretch of prairie highway under the kind of sky that makes you feel like the world has emptied out. It wasn't my town we were coming from, just a place a few hours away where we had spent the day. My wife was in the passenger seat, half awake, and our 3 kids were in the back, all of them asleep in that heavy, limp way kids sleep after a long day out. The road was dark, except for the constant line of the headlights and the thin white reflection of the painted lines running ahead of me. I had been pushing the speed a bit, going around 100, just trying to get us home. There was no traffic at that hour, nothing but open land and night wind. That part of the prairies felt endless. No trees, no houses, no side roads except for the rare gravel turnoff that led to some farm too far away to see. When you're out there at night, it's hard not to feel like you're driving through a place where people aren't meant to be. The land is so flat and wide that sounds get swallowed before they travel, and it can feel like your car is the only thing left moving in the world. I remember blinking hard to keep my eyes fresh. The dashboard lights were the only warm color around me, a soft glow on the speedometer. My wife shifted, sat up a little, looked out into the dark. She had that look people get when they think something moved outside the edge of the headlights but aren't sure. That was when we saw the man. It happened fast. 1 second the road was empty. The next there was this figure standing off to the right side, just a few feet beyond the line, where the pavement dropped into gravel and dirt. He wasn't trying to hitchhike, wasn't waving his arms, didn't even seem to be watching the road. He looked like he was stumbling along it, like he had wandered out there without meaning to. His clothes were dark, messy, and he seemed unsteady, almost swaying. We passed him so fast that the shape of him blurred, but I still saw enough to know he didn't look right. He wasn't walking in a straight line. He didn't look aware of anything around him. Both of us turned our heads at the same time, like maybe the angle would help us see him better, but he vanished into the dark behind us as fast as he appeared. Right away, I felt that tight feeling in my chest, the one that comes when something doesn't make sense. Out there, 5,000 meters or more from the last town, no lights, no houses, no farms, no cars pulled over. Just a man walking along the highway in the dark like he wasn't even thinking about who might hit him. My wife said nothing, but I could feel her worry. It was the same as mine. Normally, when you see someone walking along a highway at night, you know what they're doing. Hitchhiking, heading to a broken-down car, maybe just walking between nearby towns. But out here, with nothing for miles, it felt wrong. He looked like he was in trouble, sick, lost, maybe drunk, but it was something more than that. The way his body moved was off, slow and sloppy, like he was barely in control of his legs. I wanted to turn around right away, but that stretch of highway isn't built for sudden changes. There's no shoulder wide enough to flip a U-turn without risking rolling the car or getting stuck in a ditch. And with the kids asleep in the back, I didn't want to do anything stupid, so I kept driving until I spotted a turnoff maybe a kilometer ahead. It was just a gravel road leading off into the dark, no sign, no house visible. Just one of those roads used by farmers or people who worked the land during the day. I slowed down, turned onto it, then made a slow, careful turnaround, headlights sweeping across empty fields. The land felt even more empty from that angle, the horizon just a black line. When I got the car pointed back toward the highway, I drove faster than before, trying to get back to the spot where we had seen the man. The whole time, it felt like we were racing some invisible clock. 15 minutes passed between the moment we saw him and the moment we got back to that stretch of road. In that time, Any number of things could have happened. He could have collapsed. He could have wandered into the fields. He could have been hit by another car that we never saw. The more time passed, the more I felt that pressure building in my chest. When we finally approached the spot, everything looked the same as before. Just flat prairie land, the road stretching out in both directions without a single landmark to break it up. I slowed down, scanning the shoulder for any shape at all, but there was nothing. No dark figure walking, no body on the ground, no tracks in the gravel. The land had swallowed him. We drove slowly for another half-kilometer in both directions, checking every ditch and every dark patch of grass, but we found nothing. The kids were still asleep, unaware of anything. My wife watched the road like she was waiting for something to step into the headlights. After a few minutes, I knew we weren't going to find him on our own. The prairies can hide a person fast. Even something as simple as a shallow dip in the ground can make someone vanish from sight. And we weren't sure of the exact spot anyway. When you're driving that fast, one stretch of road looks like the next. I pulled over and called the local police. It was a small detachment, the kind you find in towns with only a few streets and one gas station. I explained what happened, told them where we roughly were, told them the man looked sick or unsteady and might be in danger. The officer said he would meet us at the area and take a look. A few minutes later, his cruiser arrived. He stepped out, used a flashlight to check the grass in the ditch. I helped him look, scanning everything I could with my headlights, walking a bit along the road while trying not to go too far. It was quiet except for the wind, and the more we searched, the more that empty feeling crept into me. I knew the guy hadn't just disappeared into thin air, but it felt like he had. The officer said he would call for more help, maybe get another cruiser or two to sweep the area. He told me to take my family home since it was late, and the kids needed rest. I didn't want to leave, but I also knew I couldn't help in any real way. It was open land. They had better lights and more time. I had 3 kids asleep in the back of the car and hours left to drive. I nodded, got in the car, and drove away. But the image of that man stumbling at the side of the road stayed with me the whole night. Even when we reached home, even when I carried the kids to their beds, I kept thinking about him. There's something unsettling about seeing someone alone at night, in a place where no one should be, and then not being able to find them again. The next morning, just after sunrise, my phone rang. It was the same officer. His voice sounded different, more awake, more serious. He told me they found the man. He was unconscious, lying in a patch of grass about 100 meters from the road. He had fallen into a diabetic coma. They got to him in time, pulled him out, got him to the hospital. He had been drinking earlier in the town we had passed, wandered out too far, lost track of where he was, and his blood sugar crashed. If nobody had seen him, he would have died out there in the open, alone on the prairie with no one to help. The officer said my call saved his life. I sat there for a long time after hanging up, thinking about that moment on the highway. 15 seconds of seeing a stranger in the dark. A quick blur at the edge of the headlights. It would have been easy to ignore it, to assume he was just another person walking. But that short moment, that flash of something out of place, was the difference between someone living and someone dying alone in a field in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes when I think about that night, I picture the land again, wide and empty, the road stretching out forever. I picture the man walking with that strange, unsteady sway, drifting toward the dark like he didn't know where he was going. And I picture those few seconds when our car happened to pass, when our headlights happened to hit him, and when 2 tired people in a speeding car decided that something didn't look right. Those seconds were enough. That tiny moment in the middle of the prairies, in the middle of the night, changed everything for a stranger we didn't know, and will probably never meet. And every time I think about how easy it would have been to miss him, I feel that cold weight again. The one that settles into your chest when you realize how thin the line is between being seen and being lost forever. I had been making that same 3-hour drive for almost a year, going back and forth between my town and my boyfriend's college. I always tried to leave before it got too late, but that night I lost track of time. By the time I pulled onto the expressway, the sky was already a thick, heavy darkness. That kind of rural darkness where even the moon looks muted, and the outline of the trees becomes nothing but jagged shadows moving in and out of the edges of your headlights. My friend was with me, because she didn't want to stay alone that weekend, but she'd had too much to drink at a small get-together before we left. She giggled at nothing and leaned her head against the window while I drove. I kept the radio low and focused on the lane markers because the road felt endless at night, like one long black hallway. For the first hour everything was quiet except for the low hum of the tires and the occasional rumble when a truck passed me going the opposite way. The expressway ran through a long stretch of farmland, the kind with open fields on both sides. No streetlights, no exits for miles at a time. The darkness pressed in so close it felt like driving through a tunnel. I kept checking the gas gauge, even though I had filled up before leaving. It was just something I did when the night made me restless. I was thinking about how far I had left to go when the wheel started to shake. It wasn't subtle. The whole front of the car began to thrum like something was loose inside it. The steering wheel vibrated in my hands in a way that felt wrong, not like the bumps in the pavement or a rough patch. I slowed down, and for a moment I thought maybe the road was uneven, but the shaking only got worse. I glanced up at the passenger mirror and didn't see anything strange behind me. No smoke or sparks. But the way the car pulled slightly to the right made my stomach flip. I remember thinking that if the tire blew completely at that speed, I'd lose control, and the idea of crashing in the middle of nowhere with a drunk friend made my chest tighten. I eased onto the shoulder and flicked on the hazard lights. The sudden quiet after the engine dropped to idle made everything outside seem even darker. My friend mumbled something but stayed slumped in the seat. I sat there gripping the wheel, trying to breathe normally. I hated stopping in isolated places at night, but I didn't have a choice. I needed light, and I needed a safe place to pull over. When I looked ahead, I noticed a blue sign reflecting faintly in my headlights. A rest stop was coming up. I didn't even remember one being there, but I wasn't going to question it. I put on my turn signal even though there was no one else on the road and crept the car forward onto the small exit ramp. The rest stop looked old and half abandoned. One long building with vending machines, bathrooms, and a few parking spaces scattered around. A couple of dim lights flickered near the front, but most of the lot was swallowed in darkness. I pulled into a space close to the building where at least one of the lights stayed on, even if it buzzed like it was struggling to stay alive. My hazards blinked in an uneven rhythm, painting the asphalt in slow bursts of orange. I got out and the cold hit me first. The air felt heavier than it should have for that time of year, as if the trees around the lot were holding their breath. My tire was almost flat, the rubber squashed under the rim, and I felt a small wave of anger at myself for not stopping sooner. I knew how to change a tire. I had done it before, but doing it in the dark with poor lighting and a half-useful friend wasn't ideal. Still, I opened the trunk and lifted the mat to get to the jack and the spare. My hands shook a little, not from the cold but from the tension of the whole situation. I had just gotten the tools out when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around fast, heart jumping up into my throat. 2 men were walking over from a direction I hadn't noticed, like from the far end of the lot where the light didn't reach. They looked like they might have been traveling too, maybe truckers or guys who had been resting in their car, but I didn't see any vehicle at first glance. My instinct went tight and alert, but I tried not to show it. They came closer, and I could see they weren't old, maybe late 20s or early 30s. Nothing physically threatening on the surface, but the fact that anyone was wandering around a rural rest stop at that hour made me nervous. Still, I needed help, and I didn't want to refuse it in a way that might make things worse. I stepped back a little to give them space to look at the tire. They crouched down like they knew what they were doing, but within seconds it became obvious they didn't. One tried to fit the jack under the car in the wrong place. The other spun the lug wrench in his hands like he wasn't sure which way it was supposed to go. I felt more tension standing there watching them than when I was alone. I tried to gently take over, trying to show them step by step, but they kept reaching for things in a clumsy way. I wanted them to leave, but I didn't know how to make that happen without sounding rude or creating a weird scene in the middle of the night. Then my friend opened the passenger door and stumbled out. She stretched her arms like she was waking from a nap and then started talking at the two guys, her words slurring together. I felt a flash of panic ripple through me. She was too friendly, too loose, and the guys shifted their attention toward her in a way that made everything feel even more wrong. I guided her back toward the car, trying to keep my tone calm, trying to get her inside without making a show of it. She resisted in that lazy drunk way, dragging her feet, laughing under her breath. It took longer than it should have, but I finally got her back into the seat and closed the door. When I turned around again, the two men were standing closer than before. Not close enough to touch me, but enough that I felt boxed in. I told them I appreciated the attempt, but I could finish it. They didn't move right away. That moment, those few seconds when they didn't step back, is something I still remember too clearly. It made the air around me feel wrong, like something was about to shift in a way I couldn't control. Before I could say anything else, I noticed a faint pair of headlights sliding across the pavement from the far back corner of the lot. A car I had not seen earlier, tucked so far into the shadows that it might as well have been invisible. It moved slowly, not fast, but with the kind of steady direction that made it impossible to ignore. The two men looked over their shoulders at it, and something changed in their posture. They didn't say a word, didn't even look at me again. They just hurried away. Not a walk, not a casual move. They left like they had somewhere else they suddenly needed to be. They got into a dark car parked beyond the reach of the lights, and within a few seconds they drove off down the exit ramp back toward the expressway. The new car pulled up a few spaces away from me. Two men got out, older than the first pair, calmer somehow. They didn't look at me with curiosity or interest, more like they already knew what was happening. They didn't ask questions or say anything. They simply walked over, looked at the tire, positioned the jack correctly, loosened the lug nuts with steady hands, and worked with a kind of quiet efficiency that made the whole situation feel different. My friend stayed in the car this time, watching through the window. I stood there with my arms crossed, not in a defensive way, but because I didn't know what else to do. I watched them swap the flat for the spare with a speed that made me wonder how many times they had done it before. The sound of metal clicking into place and the soft scrape of their movements was the only noise in the whole rest stop. No cars passed on the expressway. No insects buzzed near the lights. It was all strangely still. When they finished, they lowered the car and tightened everything again. I said thank you, the only thing I could say, and both of them just gave me small nods. No smile, no wave. They got back into their car and drove away the same direction they came from, disappearing into the dark corner before pulling out onto the road. I stood there for a long moment before getting into my car. My hands shook again, but for a different reason. The first pair had left too fast when the second car arrived. The second pair had worked with silent purpose. I didn't know if they knew the first two, or if they had been watching, or if they had just arrived at the right moment. I still don't know. I drove home slowly, both hands tight on the wheel, checking the mirrors more often than usual. My friend sobered up halfway through the drive, confused why I was so tense. I didn't explain much until we were almost home, and even then I kept most of it to myself. It's been more than 20 years now, and I still think about those men. Not the first two, the ones who made my skin crawl even though they hardly did anything. I think about the two who pulled up from the shadows, the ones who changed my tire without a word. I never saw their faces clearly. I don't know their names or where they came from or what made them stop. Maybe they were just passing through. Maybe they had been resting there a long time. Maybe they saw something I didn't. But I remember the way they worked, the calmness of it, the quiet focus. I remember the way the first two left the instant they arrived. And I remember how the air felt less dangerous once they stepped into the circle of dim light around my car. I don't know who they were, but I hope they lived good lives after that night. I hope they helped other people the way they helped me. I still carry that moment with me whenever I drive alone late at night, and even though the memory scares me, the ending is something I'm grateful for. They didn't ask for anything, didn't linger, didn't try to make it into a story. They just did the job I needed and left. And because of that, I made it home safely. That was the only ending I needed. I started that drive already tired. I was 20, broke, and stubborn enough to think I could handle an 8-hour trip home after a long day. I couldn't afford a motel, and even if I could, I probably would have talked myself out of it. The plan was to make it straight through, get home by maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, crash in my own bed, and deal with everything else later. The accident on the expressway changed everything. Traffic stopped for almost an hour. Emergency lights flashed across the trees, and I sat in a line of cars with the window cracked, listening to engines idle and watching the time slip away. By the time I finally got moving again, it was close to 11 p.m., and I still had 4 hours left. The road ahead was pitch black, the kind of dark that eats the edges of your headlights. For the first hour, I thought nothing of the car behind me. It wasn't tailgating or acting strange. It kept a normal distance. On a long stretch of rural highway with almost no exits, cars just naturally stack up behind each other. Still, something about the steady presence of its headlights in my rearview mirror made me adjust the mirror more than usual. I told myself it was nothing. Just another late night driver heading north. My eyes were getting heavy, so when a gas station showed up like a tiny island of light on the side of the road, I pulled in. It wasn't even a full station. Just 2 pumps, a small store with flickering fluorescent lights, and a vending machine leaning against the wall like someone forgot to move it 10 years ago. I parked and went inside to grab an energy drink. When I came back out, I noticed the same car parked across the road. No one stepped out. No movement at all. I told myself again that it was nothing. Maybe they were making a phone call or checking directions. Maybe they didn't want to go inside. I shrugged it off, got back into my car, and pulled out. The car across the road waited a few seconds, then pulled out too, falling right back in behind me. That was the first moment my stomach tightened a little. Not full fear yet, just that uneasy twist that tells you something is off. I tried to push it down and focus on the road. The energy drink worked its way into my system, and for a while, I felt more awake. Forest on both sides, no towns, no houses, no lights except my headlights and the steady beam behind me. I kept glancing in the mirror without meaning to. After another hour, I really had to use the bathroom. Another rest stop came up. Just a small turnout with a couple of vending machines and a single building with bathrooms. No cars, no people, just the soft hum of the lights inside the shelter. I slowed down and pulled in. The car behind me didn't pull in. It stopped at the entrance to the rest area. Just sat there with its engine running, headlights facing the highway. It didn't move. Didn't back up. Didn't drive away, just stayed. That was the first time real fear hit me. It was cold, quick, and sharp. I sat in my car with the door open, staring at the vehicle waiting at the entrance. My whole body felt tense, like every muscle had pulled tight at the same time. I didn't even get out. I shut the door again and pulled back onto the road because something in me said it wasn't safe. Once I was back up to speed, I kept checking the mirror. The car waited, then merged back onto the highway, falling in behind me like it had never stopped. At that point, I needed to know if I was imagining it or not. Maybe the driver really did just happen to be going the same way. Maybe I was letting the dark get to me. To test it, I pulled into one of the small gravel pull-outs on the right. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my hands. The other car didn't pull into the same one. Instead, it eased into the pull-out on the opposite side of the road. The engine stayed on. No one got out. No window rolled down, nothing. Just the bright glow of headlights reflecting off the trees. That was enough for me. I didn't wait. I pulled back out onto the highway again and kept my speed steady. The car did the same. Even from a distance, I could see its headlights trailing behind me like something glued to my bumper by an invisible line. I was almost 2 hours from home, and there was nothing around me except endless black forest. I kept glancing at every road sign, counting down miles, trying to steady my breathing. Every time the road curved, I checked if the headlights were still there. Every time I crested a hill, I waited to see if they'd reappear. And every time they did. By the time I reached the outskirts of my town, I was shaking. My fingers hurt from how tightly I'd been gripping the wheel. I called my parents the moment I saw the first familiar streetlights. I didn't explain much, just enough for them to know I wasn't imagining it. They told me to drive downtown and make 4 left turns in a row, a simple box, a loop, a test. I did exactly what they said. 1 left turn, the headlights followed. 2nd left turn, still behind me. 3rd, no change. 4th, the car was still there, turning with me like it was connected by a rope. The fear at that point felt heavy, like it filled the air inside my car. My parents told me to drive to the police station. I didn't hesitate. I headed straight for it, passing dark shops, empty sidewalks, and rows of parked cars that all looked the same in the yellow streetlights. When I turned into the parking lot of the police station, the car behind me didn't slow down. It sped up. A sudden burst of acceleration, tires screaming against the pavement. It shot past the entrance, weaving across the empty road, and disappeared into the dark, going at least 50 over the limit. The sound of its engine echoed off the buildings, then faded. Inside the station, I told the officers everything. They sent out a patrol car, took down details, asked me for the make and color. I answered as best I could, but in the dark, with my nerves shot, all I could give them was a general description. They said they'd look around. I never heard anything back. No call, no follow-up, nothing. I got home that night shaking so hard I had to sit in the driveway before going inside. My whole body felt drained, like the fear had wrung me out. I lay awake for hours replaying every moment, every turn, every time those headlights stayed behind me. Even now, years later, any time a car follows me for more than a few minutes at night, I feel that old fear creep up again. It's a quiet fear, but strong. The kind that reminds you how quickly a normal night can turn into something you never forget. I still don't know who was in that car or what they wanted. I only know they chose to follow me for hours through empty roads, pulling over when I did, stopping when I did, watching without ever stepping out. And that's what makes it terrifying. Not knowing, not understanding, just the steady, silent presence of someone who had their own reason to shadow me through the night, and how close I came to being completely alone with them if I had made one wrong choice. I was about 20 when this happened, maybe a little younger, but old enough to think I knew how to handle myself during long night drives. Back then I was in college about 4 hours from my hometown, and every few weeks I'd make the trip back for a weekend. I always liked the drive in daylight, the long stretches of empty road, the slow roll of fields and trees, the way the sky opened up once you got far enough from campus. But at night those same roads turned into something else. They weren't welcoming or peaceful. They were just dark, empty, and quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. My mom lived far outside the city on a ranch house tucked in the countryside, and getting to it meant passing miles of country road, where you might not see another car for 20 or 30 minutes at a time. That night I'd been out with friends doing one of those late night glow bowling events where the music is loud, the lights are strange colors, and everyone is half awake, but buzzing from it. It ended late, much later than I intended. I said my goodbyes, got in my car, and started the familiar drive back to my mom's place. I remember feeling a little tired, that heavy, slow kind of tired that settles behind your eyes. But I wasn't sleepy enough to pull over or anything. I just wanted to get home, get in bed, and enjoy the quiet of her house, far from campus noise. The first hour was nothing unusual. The city lights faded behind me, the road narrowed, the houses thinned out, and eventually I was in the countryside where the only light came from my headlights and the occasional reflective road sign. The sky was almost black, no moon that I could see, and the air had that stillness that only comes late at night in rural areas. No wind, no movement, just the hum of my tires. I didn't notice the other car at first. Not because I wasn't paying attention, but because it hadn't been there 1 second, and then suddenly it was. I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw headlights far behind me, too far to think anything of. But then they got closer. Not fast, not aggressive at first. Just gaining. I figured it was some local heading home who wanted to get around me. The road had plenty of space for that. But the car didn't pass. It slowed until it matched my speed exactly. Right behind me, maybe 2 or 3 car lengths back. I kept driving, waiting for the moment it would move into the other lane and go around. But that moment didn't come. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself there was no reason to assume anything bad. It was late, maybe the driver was tired or unfamiliar with the road. I tried to focus on my own driving. A couple of minutes passed before I realized the car was drifting left and right behind me. Not enough to cross a line, but enough that it looked wrong. That slow, deliberate weaving that makes your chest tighten a little. At first I thought maybe the person was drunk and trying to keep themselves awake. But then it kept happening over and over, and the car crept closer until it was too close for comfort. Close enough that I could see the shape of the hood in the headlights. The road was still completely empty. No houses, no gas stations, no streetlights, no other drivers. Just me and this swerving car glued to my bumper on a pitch, black country road at 2 in the morning. My stomach dropped. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Every instinct in me went straight to fear. I sped up a little, not enough to look panicked, just enough to put some space between us. The car matched my speed. I slowed down slightly. It slowed too. Its headlights shifted slightly left and then right, that slow weaving never stopping. I kept driving, but my brain had started to race. There was no way I was going home with someone like that behind me. I wasn't about to lead a stranger, drunk or otherwise, straight to the house where my mom lived alone. I didn't want them knowing where I stayed. I didn't want them following me up that long driveway where there were no neighbors and no one awake. I made the first turn I could, even though it took me off my normal route. A sharp right onto another empty road. The car followed so closely that its headlights swung in the mirror the second I turned, like it anticipated it. That felt worse than the swerving. I tried again at the next intersection. A left, then another right. I drove in circles, making unnecessary turns, looping through areas I barely knew. The car never hesitated. It never slowed. It never tried to pass. It stuck to me like it was tethered. The longer it went on, the more real the fear became. I could feel it in my jaw and my shoulders, in the way the back of my neck tingled every time I checked the mirror. The road ahead was endless black, but behind me those headlights kept shaking, creeping, weaving as if the driver wanted me to know they were still there. After several minutes of trying to lose him, I realized I had no plan. I was just turning randomly, hoping something would change. The country roads weren't going to help me. They were too dark, too empty, too easy for someone to trap you on. I needed light. I needed speed. I needed the city. So I stopped trying to lose him on back roads and headed toward the main highway that led back into town. It was still early morning, probably around 2 or 3, but I knew the highway would at least have streetlights. Maybe a truck or two. Maybe enough visibility to make the situation feel less suffocating. The car stayed on me the entire way. When the road widened, it didn't try to pass. When the speed limit increased, it matched me. When I tried slowing down abruptly to see if it would go around, it slowed within a second, keeping that same distance and weaving like it was taunting me. I merged onto the highway, heart pounding, palms sweating. The streetlights overhead made the whole situation feel sharper, more defined. I could see the car clearly in the mirror now, not the driver, but the shape of the vehicle. Just a dark sedan, nothing unusual. Something you'd see every day in a normal situation. But nothing about this was normal. I stayed in the fast lane, going faster than I should have, hoping the car behind me wasn't willing to keep up at unsafe speeds. But it did. Every time I accelerated, it accelerated. Every time I tried to ease off the gas, its headlights pressed closer, filling my mirror. It followed me like that for miles. I don't even know how many. Time felt stretched out and strange. I wasn't thinking clearly anymore, just reacting, gripping the wheel, staring ahead, glancing back every few seconds. Then, without thinking it through at all, I made a move that could have caused a wreck if anyone else had been around. I jerked the wheel and swerved across all the lanes toward an exit that came up on my right. I didn't signal. I didn't slow down. I just cut across the lanes and shot down the ramp, praying the driver behind me wouldn't be able to react in time. In the mirror, I saw the headlights shift sharply, like the driver had tried to follow, but they overshot it. They went past the exit at highway speed. The car kept going straight. I watched the lights shrink as it moved farther down the road. When it disappeared over the rise, the relief hit me so hard it made my chest ache. But the fear didn't go away. Not even close. I sped through town, heart still pounding, hands still shaking. I took side streets. I checked every mirror constantly. Every set of headlights behind me made my skin crawl. Every red light made me bounce my leg, like I was trying to shake off the lingering panic. When I finally got back to my mom's driveway, I sat in the car for a minute, engine running, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine and the faint ringing in my ears. My whole body felt like it was made of buzzing wires. I kept looking down the road, waiting for headlights that never appeared. Inside the house it was quiet, the kind of deep country quiet, where the only sound is the refrigerator and your own breathing. I should have felt safe. Instead, I closed every curtain, locked every door twice, and turned on more lights than I needed. I lay in bed with my heart still racing long after the house went still. The strange thing is, nothing ever came of it. I never saw the car again, or at least not knowingly. I never found out who was driving or what they wanted, or why they stayed glued to me for so long on those empty roads. There was no explanation waiting later, no news story, no police notice, nothing. Just me, those dark country roads, and a swerving car that seemed to have no purpose except to follow me until I forced it away. Even now, years later, I still feel a knot in my stomach when I drive those same routes at night. Every time I make the turn off the highway and the lights fade behind me, I think about those weaving headlights in my mirror. I think about how alone the road felt. I think about how easily things could have gone differently if I had panicked at the wrong moment or slowed down too much. It changed the way I feel about night driving forever. I still make that trip sometimes, but I don't relax on those roads anymore. I don't trust the quiet. I don't trust the emptiness. And I don't trust the feeling of headlights behind me, no matter how normal they look. That night taught me how fast a normal drive can turn into something you never forget. Something that stays with you long after the car disappears into the darkness and the road returns to silence. I had been doing on-call IT support around nuclear stations for a few years by then, long enough to get used to the late-night phone calls and the long drives, but not long enough to stop dreading them. It was always the same pattern. The phone buzzed while I was half asleep, the duty manager's message sitting there, short and cold. A server had gone down at Haysham on the opposite side of the country. No remote access, no backup route, in sight. That was all I ever got. So I dragged myself out of bed, still foggy with the kind of tiredness that makes the air feel thick, got dressed in whatever clothes were closest to the radiator, and went out into the cold night to start the drive. The roads were empty at that time. The northeast coast felt like a different world after midnight. Shop windows black, houses dark, only the streetlights humming overhead. I remember thinking how dead everything looked while I rolled past the same petrol stations and roundabouts I had memorized from every other call-out. Once I hit the motorway, there was nothing to do but sit in that tunnel of headlights and wait for the miles to pass. My brain felt like it was running through syrup. I kept checking the clock on the dashboard, even though I already knew the drive would take hours. My heater was blowing warm air straight at my face, trying to keep me awake. My coat was bunched up under my left leg. I kept shifting around trying to get comfortable. By the time I got to Heysham, the wind from the Irish Sea was blowing hard enough to push against the car doors. The station sat there in its usual grim silence, security lights glowing like pale moons against the concrete. I went through the checks, walked across the site with my ID badge slapping against my chest, and spent the next hour buried in the server room, sorting out a network issue that probably could have been prevented if someone had done proper patching. It always annoyed me how the worst jobs came at the worst times. When the last machine finally pinged back online and everything started behaving again, I felt that foggy wave of relief that comes when you know the hardest part is done. But you're still hours away from sleep. The time was around 3 in the morning when I got back in the car. The sky was black and flat. No moonlight. Just that kind of heavy night, where you can't see the shape of anything beyond the reach of your headlights. I was already imagining how good my bed would feel when I got home, but I knew the road would take me across the moors. I had done it before, and it was never pleasant even in daylight. It wasn't the kind of place where you wanted to break down or stop for any reason. Just open emptiness, miles of it. The road leading out of the coastal town was quiet, only the occasional light from a farmhouse window far out in the fields. When I reached the turnoff that led into the backroads, everything outside the car seemed to disappear. The hedges on either side crept in close and the road narrowed, until it felt like I was driving through a tunnel. The wind was strong enough to push the car slightly sideways whenever I came round a bend. My headlights were the only thing showing me where the tarmac ended and the rough grass began. I was tired enough that every small noise in the car seemed louder than usual. The rattle of something in the boot, the tires humming against the surface, the faint tick from the dashboard. Eventually the hedges gave way to open moorland. It was like driving straight into nothing. No houses, no streetlights, no buildings. Just the endless rise and fall of the moors stretching away into the dark. I couldn't see the hills, only the faint shape of them in the black sky. The wind was stronger up there, hitting the car with long, uneven gusts. I kept both hands on the steering wheel, trying not to let the tiredness win. That was when I saw something out to my right. It was so quick that I couldn't be sure I had really seen anything at all. Just a flash, like the brief reflection of something catching my headlights, even though there was nothing out there to catch them. I looked again, squinting through the side window, but everything was just dark and flat. I kept driving, trying to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Lack of sleep, or a bit of reflective debris someone had dropped out on the moor. The kind of harmless explanation that made sense. A minute later I saw it again. This time clearer. A small, faint glow off to the right. Greenish pale like a dying LED light. It moved slowly, disappearing and then showing again for half a second. I frowned, leaning forward in the seat even though it didn't help. I didn't know what the hell it was. Nothing should have been out there at that time of night. The nearest building was miles away. The fields were empty, the ground uneven. There shouldn't have been anything glowing. I kept going, thinking maybe it was a piece of farm equipment or a distant quad bike, something with a failing light. But then another glow appeared. Then another, and another. They were scattered, drifting, and then fading. And they looked higher off the ground than any machine would be. Almost level with the height of my windows. Almost like they were floating. My pulse picked up. I wasn't usually the type to get spooked on night drives, but there was something wrong about the way those lights appeared and moved. They didn't behave like headlights or torches or anything mechanical. They came in and out as if they were blinking, or responding to something, or searching. I tried to keep my eyes on the road, but I kept glancing right, watching the glows multiply. There were 6 or 7 now, maybe more. Each time they came back, they seemed slightly closer to the road, moving in slow arcs, slipping behind shapes I couldn't see. And the longer I watched them, the more I realized they were drifting diagonally toward me, like they were following the same path I was taking but from the side. My throat went dry. My hands tightened on the wheel. Every instinct I had was starting to wake up, even though my brain kept scrambling for a rational explanation. I turned the heater down because suddenly the car felt too warm. The windows were fogging slightly at the corners. I wiped them with the back of my hand, trying to focus on the tarmac curves ahead. The road twisted and dipped, forcing me to slow. I didn't want to stop, not for anything, but my speed dropped without me thinking about it. The same way your body reacts when you sense something out of place. The lights kept edging closer, brightening whenever they appeared. They were definitely green now, not white or blue, but a dull, eerie green like something chemical or unnatural. They bobbed gently as if they were hanging from invisible threads. Every time I blinked, they seemed to shift. At that point, I could feel the fear tightening inside my chest. That kind of fear you don't admit to out loud, because it sounds ridiculous. My imagination started going places it shouldn't go. I kept telling myself I was just exhausted, that it was nothing dangerous, but my mind kept jumping to the worst possibilities. I felt a little sick. The lights had reached the edge of the road. They were maybe 10 or 15 meters ahead, right along the grass line. I slowed more than I meant to. I realized I was leaning forward, elbows locked, breathing shallow. My headlights hit a rise in the road, bounced slightly, and all the little green lights flared brighter for a moment. They seemed to dance. I thought about stopping, then immediately thought no. Stopping was the last thing I was going to do. I kept crawling forward, my heart pounding, everything in me ready for something to step or float or drop into my path. And that was exactly when it happened. Out of the darkness, 4 shapes burst directly across the tarmac in front of me. My foot slammed the brake so hard the seatbelt locked across my chest. The tires screeched against the rough surface, and the whole car jolted violently. For a moment, all I could see were pale bodies moving fast in front of the bonnet. Loud, heavy thumps of hooves. Wool flashing in the beam of my headlights. Sheep. Just 4 sheep, running across the road like they were late for something. Their eyes reflected my headlights with that same greenish flare I'd been seeing the whole time. Every single one of those lights had been nothing more than the reflections of sheep standing scattered across the moor, turning their heads as I approached. I sat there, chest tight, hands shaking against the wheel. My breath came out in a long, shaky rush. The kind of breath you don't realize you've been holding. I let my head fall back against the headrest. My pulse felt like a hammer in my ears. I felt stupid, completely ridiculous. But I was so relieved I almost laughed. And then I actually did laugh, a tired, broken laugh that filled the car more than I meant it to. Everything I had imagined vanished in an instant, replaced by that absurd image of 4 sheep sprinting across the road like escape artists. I kept driving after that, a bit slower but lighter, almost embarrassed even though no one had seen me. The road seemed less threatening once the truth settled in. The moors were still dark and empty, but they weren't full of floating lights anymore. Just animals wandering around in the middle of the night, doing what sheep do. By the time I reached the main road again, the sky had started to glow faintly with the first hint of dawn. I could finally feel the weight of the night starting to lift. I thought about how fear works. How your brain fills in gaps when you're tired and alone in a place you don't know well. I had gone from imagining something dangerous closing in on me to watching 4 confused sheep bolt across the road. It made me realize how easy it is to let the dark twist things into shapes they aren't. When I finally got home, the whole night already felt like a strange dream. But the moment when those lights moved across the moor toward me stayed in my mind for a long time. Not because of what they were, but because of what I thought they were. I kept replaying it, the way the fear built slowly until it felt real enough to touch. It reminded me how thin that line is between normal and terrifying, especially when you're alone on a back road at 3 in the morning with miles of empty land around you. And in the end, it was nothing more than sheep. Real, ordinary, harmless sheep. But that night, out on those moors, in that darkness, those sheep had scared me more than anything else ever had. I grew up in a place where you could drive for miles and never see another set of headlights. The kind of area where the sky gets so dark at night that you can't tell where the tree line ends and the road begins unless your high beams hit it. I lived halfway up a mountain road that twisted through thick woods, and my girlfriend at the time lived even deeper in those woods, far from anything normal like a gas station or store. Back then, I didn't think twice about picking up strangers on the road. It was just something people did because out there, you almost felt guilty passing someone by. Everyone knew how cold and empty the nights got. It was Christmas night, and I was 18. I had spent the day with my family and was driving back to my girlfriend's place. I remember checking the time on my phone every few minutes, trying to make it home before 2 in the morning. I was tired, wired on leftover holiday food and sugar, and speeding way too fast for a road that didn't even have guardrails in some places. The speedometer kept bouncing near 80. I didn't care. I knew the road like the back of my hand, every dip and curve, every place the pavement cracked and rattled the tires. The night air was freezing. The kind of cold where, if you stepped outside, the inside of your nose felt like it was turning into glass. Everything outside the truck was pitch black, except for the narrow tunnel of light my headlights pushed through the trees. The woods looked even thicker in the dark, like the branches were leaning over the road. I had the heater blasting to keep the windshield from fogging, and even then I had to wipe it with my sleeve every couple minutes. About halfway along that long straight stretch, I saw something on the side of the road. It flashed by so fast I thought maybe I imagined it. Just a shape in the corner of my eye. But something about it stuck in my mind, and my foot came off the gas. I looked in the rear view mirror and saw a faint human shape walking along the shoulder, way out there in the dark. He was alone, carrying something long in his hand, and for a second I told myself to just keep driving. But it was Christmas night and below freezing. Out there, a person could freeze to death before anyone else came by. I hit the brakes, probably harder than necessary, and the back tires slid a bit on the cold pavement. I reversed slowly, watching the headlights sweep over the trees, until they lit up the man on the road. He was bundled in dark clothes, hood up, face mostly hidden. The thing in his hand was a compound bow. That threw me off. A bow out here, at 1:30 in the morning. My first thought was exactly what any local teenager would think: poacher. I knew plenty of people who hunted at night with spotlights or bows, but something about seeing him out there alone made the hair on my arms stand up. Still, I had already stopped, and backing out would have made things worse. I told myself I'd just take him wherever he needed and drop him off quick. No big deal. I wasn't scared yet. Just uneasy in that small way you get when you know you're doing something dumb, but don't want to admit it. He put the bow in the truck bed and got in without saying anything. I figured he'd tell me where to go, maybe explain what he was doing out there, but instead he just sat there stiff and silent. I waited for him to talk, but he didn't. His hands were in his pockets. His shoulders were pulled up like he was holding in a cough or a cold shiver. The air in the cab changed the moment he closed the door. It felt tight, like the temperature dropped a few degrees. I started driving again, hoping he'd speak first, but he didn't. The road stretched out in front of us. No houses, No pull-offs except a few logging paths and old turnouts half buried in leaves. I kept glancing sideways at him. He kept his face turned forward, barely blinking. When I asked him something simple about Christmas, he mumbled no and went silent again. Not angry, not sad, just empty. That was when my stomach dropped. I realized I didn't want him in my truck anymore. I didn't care if he was going 2 miles or 10. The silence started to feel thick, like soundproof foam around my ears. I could hear the engine, the hum of the tires, the heater clicking, but nothing from him. I kept my eyes on the road, because looking at him too long made me feel trapped. I didn't know if I was imagining it, but his breathing seemed slow and steady in a way that didn't match the cold, or the walk he must have been on. I couldn't read him at all. After a couple minutes, he finally said something. "Turn off up ahead." Just that. I slowed a little. There was an old dead-end turnoff coming up I knew well. It led into a dirt patch that hunters used sometimes. It didn't go anywhere. I had driven past it 1,000 times. There were no houses down there. No reason to park unless you were up to something. I didn't like the idea of pulling all the way in, so I stayed on the side, half in the turnout, half on the road. The truck headlights shined straight into the woods, where the trees looked like tall shadows stacked on each other. The man didn't get out right away. He just stayed seated, staring forward. I could feel the cold air seeping into the cab, even though the door was closed. It felt like he was thinking hard about something, and I didn't want to know what. After a few long seconds, he opened the door but didn't step out immediately. Then he got out slowly, leaving the door hanging open. I felt exposed with him standing outside like that, like he could lean back in at any second. He didn't say anything, just stood there. I reached across the seat to close the door, but before I could, I said something about his bow, more out of instinct than concern. He turned, walked to the back, and grabbed it. That's when he stopped moving. He stood there holding the bow, not walking away, not turning toward the woods, just staring straight at me through the window. I don't know how long it was. A few seconds, maybe 10, maybe more. His face didn't show anything. No anger, no thanks, nothing human that I could place. I couldn't tell if he was deciding something, or if he was waiting for me to do something first. The cold outside felt like it crept right through the glass. Then something else clicked in my head. There was a minivan parked in the dirt off the road. I hadn't seen it at first in the dark, not until I looked past him. The side door was open, no lights on, no movement. Just sitting there in the cold with the door gaping, like someone left it in a hurry or never meant to close it. Something about that made everything inside me twist. This wasn't just a guy walking home. There was something going on in that dark patch that I didn't want to know about. I didn't wait another second. My foot hit the gas while my hand pulled the wheel. The truck jerked forward, the door slammed shutting from the force. I didn't look back. I kept my eyes locked on the road ahead as the engine roared back up to speed. My hands shook against the steering wheel, and every bump in the road felt sharper than normal. I didn't breathe right until I saw the first distant porch light near town. When I finally got to my girlfriend's house, I sat in the driveway with the engine running. My heart was pounding, but the rest of me felt drained, like everything warm in me had leaked out along the way. I kept thinking about the open van door in the dark, the silence in the cab, the way he stared at me like he was weighing something. I knew I had avoided something bad, even if I couldn't say what it was. I never picked up another hitchhiker again after that, not once, not even during the day. That night changed the way the road looked to me. The same trees, the same turns, but now it all felt thinner. Like there were things that could go wrong in a second, and no one would ever know. I still think about that guy sometimes, walking alone on Christmas night with a bow in his hand and a minivan waiting in the dark. I don't know what he planned to do, and I'm glad I don't. All I know is I trusted my gut at the last possible moment, and it saved me from something I never want to understand. That night was the last time I ever let a stranger into my truck. I didn't feel bad about it. Out there, in the cold and the dark, you learn quick that doing something good doesn't always mean doing something safe. Sometimes you just have to get yourself home alive. I remember that night so clearly because of how normal it all started and how fast it turned into something that didn't feel right at all. It was around 9 at night, still warm from the long summer day, the kind of heat that hangs in the air even after the sun is gone. My sister was practicing her driving hours, and since our area is mostly quiet roads, she liked driving at night when there weren't many cars out. I sat in the passenger seat trying to stay alert because she was still a little shaky with turning and judging distance. The windows were all the way down because the air felt good, warm but not sticky, and the inside of the car felt too closed in when the windows were up. When we pulled into the gas station, it felt like any other slow summer night. The lights were bright enough around the pumps, but the edges of the lot fell off into darkness. Behind the station were only trees, and beside it was a long empty sidewalk with no streetlights at all. It was one of those spots where the light from the station reached a few feet out, and then just ended sharply, leaving a wall of black past that point. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I was more focused on making sure my sister didn't forget to put the car in park. She went inside to grab a drink, and I stayed in the car. Everything felt calm. A few cars passed on the road, not many. The clerk inside laughed at something someone said. It was a quiet, regular night. When my sister came back, she got into the driver's seat and took a second to adjust her seatbelt and mirrors again. We were about to pull out, waiting for a break in the steady line of cars coming down the road. Then I heard it. A raspy voice from somewhere to the right. A woman's voice, middle-aged from the tone, rough like someone who smoked a lot or hadn't used her voice all day. It came from the sidewalk area, just outside the circle of light. I turned my head sharply because it didn't feel like the kind of voice you hear near a gas station. There was no one visible. It was just darkness, thick and still. The voice called out to us again. I felt my stomach tighten. My sister froze a little, her hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. The woman kept talking, asking us to drive her to her brother's house. She said she got off the bus too early and didn't know where he lived. That was the part that made something feel off immediately. If she didn't know where he lived, how would she know the direction at all? The sidewalk next to us was empty, totally swallowed in darkness. No shape, no movement, no outline of a person. It felt wrong to hear a voice so close but see nothing. I kept trying to look harder, lean forward, focus my eyes, but nothing came into view. It was like the darkness itself was hiding her. The road was busy enough that we couldn't turn out yet, and that made the whole thing worse. We were stuck there with the windows wide open, the warm air pouring in, and this unseen woman talking to us like she was standing right next to the car. I could hear her breathing between the words. It was shaky and uneven. I didn't know if it was fear, anger, or something else. My sister kept waiting for a gap in traffic, gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles were pale. I could hear her breathing too, shallow and fast, like she was trying not to look in the direction of the voice. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to finally see her, but it stayed pitch black. The cars kept coming, one after another, slow and spaced just enough that we couldn't go, but not far enough apart to make a clean turn. The woman kept insisting she wasn't a sketchy person. The more she talked, the more something felt wrong, something deeper than fear. It was the confusion that hit me, the way she kept repeating that she needed a ride, but couldn't explain where. The road she stood on was the only main road in that area, and if she really got off the bus too early, She would have been walking in the direction of the next bus stop, or at least toward the lights of the gas station. But she wasn't walking. She was just standing in the dark, talking to strangers in a car with open windows. A small part of me wanted to help. I grew up in a place where helping strangers wasn't unusual. People got stuck without rides all the time, but something in her tone didn't match someone who was lost or confused. It had this dry, forced calmness, like someone trying to keep you from noticing something they didn't want you to see. I realized then how exposed we were. The doors were locked, but the windows were too far down, open enough for someone to grab at us or reach into the car. The sidewalk was only a few feet from where I sat. If she stepped forward just a little, she'd be right at my window. My chest tightened as the thought crossed my mind, and I could feel the heat of the night suddenly turn uncomfortable, almost sticky. We finally saw a break between the cars. My sister moved the wheel fast, and we turned out of the station. As soon as we did, the voice disappeared, like it had been cut off. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see anything step out of the darkness. We drove straight, the warm wind blasting through the windows as the car picked up speed. Neither of us said anything at first. I felt the vibration of the road under us, and the sound of the wind rushing past, and I could still feel that tightness in my chest slowly easing away. When we got far enough that the gas station lights were gone behind us, my mind started replaying everything. The voice, the darkness, the way she said she didn't know where the house was. That was what stuck with me the most. How could she guide us in a car if she couldn't even find it on foot? And why ask strangers in a parked car instead of going inside the gas station where people were? There was something else too. Most people who get off a bus too early have phones, or at least know what street they're on, or at the very least walk toward light, not stand still in a pitch black spot. The more I thought about it, the less any of it made sense in a normal way. It felt like something we avoided without realizing how close we came. When we finally got home, we rolled the windows up all the way before even turning off the engine. My sister's hands were shaking a little. Mine were too. After that night, we never drove with the windows fully down again, especially not at night, even in summer, even when it was hot. The risk of hearing a voice like that again, from a place where no person should be standing, wasn't worth it. The ending of it stayed with me long after. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because nothing did. Nothing visible. Nothing loud. Sometimes the things that stick with you are the things that almost happened, the things you avoided by seconds or by instinct. I kept thinking about what would have happened if she stepped into the light, if she walked closer to the car, if the traffic had stopped earlier, giving her more time to reach us. I kept thinking about the way her voice sounded. Raspy, calm, too steady for someone who claimed to be lost in the dark. In the end, the only thing that mattered was that we drove away. That was the clear part for me. We got out of there before anything could change, before curiosity or sympathy or hesitation could pull us into something dangerous. It made me realize how quickly a normal night can tilt into something that doesn't feel safe. How fast a simple stop for gas can turn into a moment you replay for years in your head. And I still think about that one question that came to me the moment we drove off, the same one that made everything click in the worst possible way. If she didn't know how to get to her brother's house on foot, how could she possibly tell us where to drive? I was driving back late at night after covering a high school football game, the kind of small town game that dragged on longer than it should have. By the time I packed up my camera, notes, and equipment and got back on the road, it was already close to midnight. The air felt cooler than it had earlier, and there was that quiet stillness you only get in the middle of farmland after dark. I had a long stretch of highway ahead of me, mostly flat, mostly empty, the type of road where you can go on autopilot without even realizing it. My mind drifted a little as I replayed parts of the game in my head, thinking about what I still needed to write once I got home. The road looked the same for miles, long bands of faded asphalt, gravel shoulders, and endless fields disappearing into a black horizon. My headlights reached out far ahead, but everything beyond them was just darkness. I wasn't speeding, but I was moving fast enough that I should have been more alert. The road was wide, 2 lanes with decent shoulders, and for a while it felt like nothing could happen out there. I didn't see a single car in either direction. It was just me, the hum of the engine, and the faint glow of the dashboard lights bouncing off the windshield. Sometimes I'd glance at the rearview mirror just to see the empty road behind me. Nothing but black. I had that zoned out feeling people get when they've been driving on a straight highway for too long. I wasn't asleep or tired enough to drift off, but my brain wasn't sharp. My eyes kept following the white lines more out of habit than focus. The only sound was the engine, and even that faded into the background. I didn't realize how much I had disconnected from the moment, until something inside me snapped into awareness without warning. It didn't happen because I saw something clearly. It was more like my brain registered that something looked wrong up ahead. It wasn't a shape or a color or anything I could identify. It was just a sense that the road didn't look the way it was supposed to. A subtle shift, a faint shadow out of place. Some part of my mind recognizing danger before I could consciously name it. It was enough to make my grip on the steering wheel tighten. I didn't have time to analyze anything. If I had tried to brake, even for a second, I would have hit whatever was in front of me. It was that close. So I swerved hard into the empty opposing lane. More of an instinctive move than a planned one. My tires hummed louder as they slid across the asphalt, and for a split second, I wasn't sure if the car would hold the turn, or if I was about to skid off the road. The whole thing happened in maybe half a second, but it felt stretched out enough that I could feel my heart jump in my chest. As I passed the thing in the road, all I got was a glimpse of something large, tall, and dark. No clear outline, no details, just a shadow that rose higher than a person and took up more space than it should have. My headlights barely grazed it as I went by, and by the time my mind tried to make sense of what I had avoided, I was already past it and rolling down the opposite lane. I slowed down to regain control, breathing hard from the spike of adrenaline, and eased myself back into the correct lane. My hands were shaking a little, and my chest felt tight. It didn't make sense not to know what I had just swerved around. I kept driving for another few seconds before I forced myself to pull over. The car rolled to a stop on the shoulder, and I sat there for a moment, listening to the engine idle while I tried to catch my breath. I couldn't just keep going without knowing what nearly killed me. My mind was running too fast, imagining everything from farm equipment to a large animal to a downed tree. But the shape had been too tall and too solid for any of those. I turned the car around slowly, making sure nothing else was coming. Not that I expected any traffic on that road at that hour, and started driving back the way I had come. This time I kept my speed low. I scanned the edges of the road and the pavement itself, letting the headlights stretch as far as they could. The road looked empty at first, calm and quiet like before. The fields on both sides were dark and still. When I finally approached the place where I had swerved, I saw the dark shapes standing on the edge of the road. 2 cows, big ones, jet black, barely visible against the night. They stood there in that slow, heavy way cows do, one a little ahead of the other. Both turned slightly toward the fields as if they had just wandered there, without any sense of danger. Their bodies were broad and solid enough that, if I had hit them at the speed I was going, the front of my car would have folded. The airbags might not have been enough. On a road that empty, with no one around, I could have ended up either dead or badly injured before any help found me. The thought made the back of my neck prickle. I let the car idle as I watched them. Their size felt even more obvious when I compared them to my small hatchback. My headlights cast faint outlines along their sides, enough to show that they were healthy, well-fed animals, the type farmers rely on. They didn't seem nervous. They didn't run or react to the car. They just kept standing there, taking up space like they owned the road. After a moment, they wandered off toward the field, walking slowly and disappearing into the dark beyond the reach of my lights. I knew other drivers wouldn't see them until it was too late. I hadn't seen another vehicle in a long time, but it only took one unlucky person for something tragic to happen. I reached for my phone and called the local police. The dispatcher asked for the location and said they would send someone out. There wasn't anything for me to do except wait, so I stayed there on the shoulder with my hazard lights on, watching the place where the cows had disappeared. The night felt even quieter now. The fields stretched out endlessly, and the only thing I heard was my engine and the faint buzzing of insects somewhere far off. After a few minutes, a patrol car appeared from the opposite direction, lights flashing softly in the distance. When it pulled up, the officer stepped out, walked toward the area the cows had been in, and then came back to the road. They knew exactly whose cows those were, and that this wasn't the first time they had gotten out. It seemed like something that happened often enough that the officer was already tired of dealing with it. I stayed long enough to be sure everything was under control. The officer called the owner, and I could imagine the frustration in their voice, even though I couldn't hear the conversation. When I finally got back into my car and prepared to continue the drive home, the reality of what almost happened settled deeper into my mind. It wasn't fear in the dramatic sense. It was the plain, cold understanding of how close I had come to a serious crash. A few seconds slower and noticing something was wrong, and I would have plowed straight into those animals. The image of them standing there in the dark stayed with me as I pulled away. The rest of the drive felt longer than it usually did. I kept my speed down, watching every shadow on the road with more focus than I had earlier. The silence of the farmland didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like a reminder of how vulnerable I actually was out there by myself. I thought about how many times I had driven on similar roads without thinking about what could be waiting around the next bend, or the next stretch of darkness. I thought about how random it was that I noticed the danger in time. It wasn't skill or alertness. It was luck. By the time I finally saw the glow of town lights in the distance, I felt the tension start to ease out of my chest. Pulling into my driveway felt almost unreal after how empty the highway had been. I turned off the engine, sat there for a moment in the quiet, and let myself fully understand what I had avoided. Those two cows, barely visible in the dark, could have ended everything in a single second. The ending wasn't dramatic or strange. It was just real. I got out of the car, shut the door behind me, and walked into my house with the knowledge that one small moment on a dark road had almost changed everything. I had come within inches of a fatal accident, and there was no mystery to it. No storybook twist, just a simple truth: sometimes danger is quiet, ordinary, and standing right in front of you where you can't see it until the last possible moment.